Hello, everyone. I'm here with my good friend Randy. He's a person I really respect. He has a really interesting history, and I wanted to do a video for the Biz Buying Lab with Randy because he has a really interesting story of actually acquiring within a company. But I'll let him tell us the story. First, Randy, let's just start with some basic background on who you were working with, what you were doing, just so people understand the story better.
Okay. I was working in an unusual industry, one that people don't think of as a business very often, but it is very much a business. I worked for one of the industry leaders in the funeral service industry. It was the leading casket company named Batesville Casket. They were a long-standing company. They're over 150 years old in terms of their duration. Funeral service is a fascinating business. I was working there as a marketing strategist and also in the merchandising area and sales support. So I worked kind of in multiple roles there. We actually we only sold to licensed funeral directors. So it was a little bit like a dealer network. We had a population of 18,000 funeral homes in North America. And as I mentioned, we were the industry leader. And so we served the vast majority of them. For many, many years, funeral service had been very fragmented in local industries, a lot of small wood casket manufacturers. And then in the mid 1900s, things began to change with industrialization, manufacturing development after World War II. But what really propelled Batesville to their leadership was their distribution capability. Not too unlike Amazon, they set up uh, regional warehouses and then ultimately local warehouses around the country. And that made the facilitating getting caskets to the end destination much easier. And obviously, in an industry like funeral service, there's a timing aspect. You can't order something and wait weeks. It needs to be pretty much immediately available. So they were able to solve some of the challenges like that in that industry. We had our own internal sales force and of about 100 representatives. And it was a very strong culture, a very successful culture, a very proud culture. But in the late 1900, like 1990, 2000, 2010, we're talking about in that time frame, the demographics of the industry were changing pretty rapidly. The number of deaths that were happening every year was increasing because of the aging population, but a cremation was growing at about 4.5% per year, and burials were declining at about 1.5 to 2% per year. So there were challenges in the industry that presented themselves, and we were trying to find ways that how could we continue to grow our market, take care of the consumers. Obviously, in an at-need situation, you're dealing with the grief of consumers and families, and that's very delicate, and you want to serve them well. At the same time, you are still running a business, so it presented certain challenges. And so, one of my roles was to help work with funeral homes and educate them on some business strategies and help them become more profitable and how they operated their business. Um, and in doing so, we uncovered some opportunities that we thought that we could capitalize on. So
Yeah,
that's
I
kind of the
love
basic.
yeah, I love all the things you said because as I'm listening to you, I realize there are so many insights into an industry by talking to someone who has been in the industry. And that's what a lot of people don't understand when they're looking at buying a business. If you have experience in that industry, you will have an advantage. But two, if you don't, that's okay. You can still buy into an industry that you've never had experience in. Just do the things that we talk about in the Biz Buying Lab. Talk to someone who's been there. Go visit one of the places. Pay a business owner to actually consult with you. Ask questions. Pay them for their time. There's so many
Mhm.
different ideas we share in our communities to help people get those access to those insights. And as I was listening to you, I realized, man, that's so much value in just like 3 minutes because you were so deep in the industry. And I think that's just important to highlight in the middle of this interview. But you mentioned, right? As you were doing things, you had a challenge within the business that you tried to solve, and you started to uncover things. That's what always seems to happen, right? When people have a challenge, if they pay attention, they try to come up with a solution, they uncover things that often lead to more business or another department, another organization. So tell us where that took you. I mean, how did you go about it? Where did that take you?
Well, one of the things was we had a customer trip program that brought folks into, we live in southeastern Indiana, into the area. They had a farm, and then we had plants where our corporation was. And so it was pretty well known and desired that a lot of funeral homes would come to Batesville through the customer trip program. And as a part of that, I was one of the presenters, and I would work with groups of 15 to 20 funeral homes at a time, about business problems and trying to find solutions and just listening and learning and telling and sharing what our expertise was across those 18,000 funeral homes that we could share. And obviously we were doing that, we wanted to create partnerships and we wanted to grow our relationships stronger with these funeral homes. But keep in mind that although some of those folks were trained and went to college and had business backgrounds, many of them came up through the industry. They had maybe were trained as an embalmer and went through school from that standpoint. So we were doing some basic business training. And in the course of all that, we recognized that there had to be some ways to help the industry in a bigger fashion, larger fashion. So we were talking, and the chairman of the board of our company, Dan Hillenbrand at the time, somebody said, "Hey, why can't we find some really um, leading edge retail consultants who can come in and take a look at this fresh and give us their thoughts?" And so I was handed that assignment to go find some outside consultants and bring them in. And they were pretty fascinated as they got in. And so we took them out into the field, went to the funeral homes. We visited a lot of different places. Now, keep in mind, the range of funeral homes is they might do anywhere from 30 or 40 funerals a year to the largest place that does 5,000 in one building per year. So there was a wide range. And also at this time, the industry was going through some consolidation. There were chains that were coming in and rolling up funeral homes and trying to get economies of scale. So we were dealing with a wide variety of these folks. But as we got into more learning, I shared my learning with the consultants, and then we traveled around together. We put together some salesmen from our group, and we just worked at trying to go out and listen and brainstorm as to what could we do, and then also take learning from other industries and could we apply it to this industry. And what we did was we found a couple of different things. One, we knew that as we share information with families, even though they were in a grieving state, information helped them make better decisions. And so oftentimes that led to a better quality product or service or more full package once they understood the value that was being offered. And but it wasn't always explained in the cleanest way. So we knew we had to work on the process of of how to improve sharing the funeral. If not, they would just default to what everybody's done in town forever and a day, and so they would just do the same old. At the same time, we also saw the emerging of personalization. People were getting tired of just the same old, same old. They wanted to do something that was uniquely about their loved one. And so we knew we wanted to, and we'd already seen the early edges of this, but we knew we could take personalization and offer a much better value than what was being offered before. So basically, we began to experiment with funeral homes that were early adopters. We found some people that were willing to try some things and experiment. We also knew that in the course of arranging a funeral, funerals can be done pre-need, but they also can be done at need, and most of them were done at need. Picking out the casket was a very, very emotional part of the process, and not one that was usually very well presented. And so we learned pretty quickly that if we could change the environment to make the family more comfortable in that space, if we could use better lighting, better signage, things that would help show them what they could do, including personalization options by giving them examples, that they would get much more comfortable and begin to participate in the process by ideating and and so of course we also had to show in a funeral home how they could do this and how they could execute it. So that was really the big part of what we learned we could do. Now the problem we had, there's always a problem, is that the culture in the industry that we were working, the company I was working in, wasn't really open to doing things outside the casket. They wanted to just kind of hold on to how do we just sell more and better caskets. And as we did more and more personalization options, a lot of people, especially those who've been there for a long time, got nervous. And we quickly learned that because of the culture that was trying to hold on to the current paradigm, we weren't going to be able to, I'll use the term disrupt that process very easily. And so we began to do that by creating an organization that was not owned by the parent company, one that I actually led in an informal capacity, although I didn't have ownership because of my role in the company. But we actually had to create an entrepreneur, like under the corporate umbrella, a new company that could actually execute these ideas and help the funeral homes. And that included everything from the educational and sales portion of this. We learned also that there was an execution issue with at the funeral home, they needed remodeling. They needed to have a physical change to how the products were displayed and shown, and it led to uh, intellectual property development. We created new solutions. Some were process patents, some were design patents, some were utility patents that we did, and this was all created outside yet adjacent to the core organization. So it was
That
pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's great because all of the things you've talked about, those are things anyone can take those ideas, right, and apply them to tons of industries. I'm pretty sure you can find pretty similar, different ways to apply the same principles in different industries. And again, as I'm listening to you, is really interesting because it's a funeral service company, right? We don't tend to think too much about the business side of it. Most people have an interaction with it at a hard time and challenging time in their lives, so we don't really think about the business side of it. So I want to make one point before we go back into the story. In any industry, there are at least 10 to 20% of people who are willing to pay a lot more, are willing to pay 10x. If your business doesn't provide that option to people, they're not going to pay that much extra. Think of like hotels. As you were talking, I was thinking a Motel 6, Holiday Inn, Hilton, the Ritz. You have different people going to those different hotels. There are plenty of people who go to the Ritz and pay two to $3,000 a night per regular room for a stand-up room. Other people think that's crazy, that's a waste. It's not them. And that happens in every industry, even in the funeral service industry.
Mhm.
It's important to remember that we shouldn't use what we think about something as the
Yeah.
driving force for our marketing and our sales decisions. Try to serve the people who come to your business. And you are going to have 10 to 20 people who are willing to pay ten times more. So that's just a principle that a lot of people in buying businesses and trying to grow the businesses they bought forget. And I think your story highlights a little bit of that.
Interestingly, as we went along, we learned that people, within the context of the retailer, in this case, the funeral home, we saw that some of them wanted a much higher end presentation than we were even beginning with. And so we actually, not only did we go in and help change lighting and signage, we actually got to the place where we would go in and we would do a complete remodel of that particular space from what would have an office where they would do the arrangements and then they would have this room that would have the products being displayed. We physically changed the way the products were being displayed to make it more comfortable for the families. We actually used in some cases, we actually use cut down pieces of caskets to show various ends and corners and different material types. We showed it in a good, better, best type presentation. We showed the personalization options at each step along the way. At the same time, we wanted to have variety available at all price points because they serve the entire community. And it got to the place where some of those investments made by the funeral homes would exceed 600 or would exceed six figures. It would be over $100,000 to do that kind of remodeling. And but they were seeing the rate of return on investment of doing so that made sense, and they saw the value of how they could better serve their families, and they also saw the family's response to making those changes, and while it was good for everyone involved. So, and at the same time, our company, Baseball Casket, the more we would bring these thought leading ideas into play, we grew our business because our percentage of their business grew as well. And
Yeah, that
and and the other thing
sorry.
was funny was that it was in an industry like that, word traveled fast. Then all of a sudden we had more people who wanted to see what's were they doing in Batesville, and part of the early stages, we actually, well, for most of it, we actually had these rooms that we showed our customers in labs. We did like a skunk works, and we would take them into a warehouse and show them how we could do this. And the more hidden it was, the more secretive it was, the more the demand was, and the more excitement we had in the industry. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, I when I talk to you about this and at other times we talk about business, you do see business as fun, as an adventure, and finding solutions to these problems is almost like an adventure to you. It's a game, it's something positive. I
Mhm.
think that would also help, right, business owners when they realize uh, when we stop complaining about the problems and we start to see them as a game, as a fun activity, it becomes a lot easier to find the solutions.
Mhm.
Now, going back to the actual story, you set up this organization, you
Mhm.
informally help them grow it. What happened afterwards? As because it grew quite a bit, right?
It grew quite a bit from a company. We started this company and it had zero sales when we began the work in it. And it wasn't as formal at the beginning. We were just, hiring them as consultants initially, but it wasn't very long down the path that we realized that we needed to have a more formal structure on their side, on the outside group, to execute this growing um, vision that we were bringing to the industry and that our customers really were valuing. That company grew from zero sales to about $4.5 million per year in sales by the fifth or sixth year in. And so it grew very, very quickly. And that company itself, that small company that was out there, was doing that consistently, 4, 5, 6 years in a running, and it was bringing on its own merits about $400,000 to $500,000 to the bottom line for them, for those owners. And now, granted, it was a little bit unusual because they were enabling us to do well and to sell in our core business, but yet they were bound to only work through us. So they were a little bit handcuffed to us in that standpoint, but they were doing very well and very pleased with it. But as time went by, the core company decided we really need to more have a more formal relationship here, and we want to bring this in-house. And we were nervous. We were about 7 or 8 years into this now, I think, and we began to have a dialogue with them about acquiring the very company that we helped create, and then bring it in. And the nervous piece that I had was, could we actually bring this disruptive culture, this paradigm breaking culture into the new core corporation without killing the very elements that made it successful, in the creation mode. And we were able to do that. Now, to give you an example of just how much impact that little company was having, it was bringing about $6 to $7 million in incremental profit per year to the core company. Um,
Okay,
so
so 4 to 5 million, at least in by year five, let's say, bringing 6, 7 millions into the this bigger company.
at the same
That's
time,
significant. That's
yeah,
significant. Yes.
yeah,
So you guys acquired it, and how did that process go? Because I assume, we're talking about a story that covers 10, 12 years in less than 30 minutes. We're
right.
going fast through the details, but what about the process,
Okay.
the
In the
challenges
company,
of the,
we were in our company, Batesville Cast Company was a part of a larger company, Hillenbrand Industries at the time, and it has since changed form and been sold off multiple times. But So they were used to buying companies. Now they weren't used to buying companies of this size and this nature, but they had a very strong process they wanted me to follow through because not only was I leading that outside organization, now I was put in charge of the M&A, if you want to call it that. So I had to follow a process with the attorneys and the accountants from corporate to bring this in and do it properly. So what we did was we did an asset purchase. And it included just the assets and the IP. It did not include the LLC structure of that outside entity. Liabilities that we took on were limited to trade payables and operating leases. So they wanted to they didn't want to have any surprises down the road. So there were no notes payable. There were no consulting agreements that were assumed. Now, there were some consulting agreements that came out as a part of the deal, um, but it included an upfront cash payment when we acquired this. It included an employee retention and bonus program. We had non-compete agreements for the primary employees for 5 years. We had fixed annual payments for 5 years, so it was like a 5-year structure. And then there was a consulting agreement for the lead person who was really the main thrust, the main creator on the outside for 2 years with an option to renew him for an additional 2 years. So the total deal structure on that was about a $4.5 to $5 million total package over that 5-year period. And yeah,
That's
so like I
great.
said,
I
yeah.
appreciate you giving some details to how you guys structured the deal. I think that's helpful because it allows people to understand there are many ways to structure deals. Uh, really, the sky's the limit because you can come up with as many structures as you want. It just depends on creating a win-win for both sides. Now, in this case, you had almost like a formula. You had constraints, you had to play within those. But when someone like me goes around and looks for businesses to buy, I don't have many constraints other than it has to be a win-win-win. Like that's the constraint for the seller, for the buyer, for the investors, for anyone involved. So you had a little bit more of a constraint, but that sometimes it's helpful because it keeps you from making decisions that might be harmful for the company.
Mhm.
Did you learn anything else through the process that you think it might be useful to people who are thinking about buying businesses?
Well, when you have an existing business and you're buying an additional business, one of the things that was really there was a lot of emphasis placed on what were the synergies between the businesses. Now, this one was crazy. The profitability and the synergy was crazy because of the relationship here. So that was a little bit out of the ordinary because they were pretty much handcuffed to each other in some sense. But the question that I really was surprised at how much emphasis we placed on making sure we understood how could we really benefit by bringing this into the other business. And I know it sounds logical to say, okay, make sure you understand the synergies, but we really pushed the envelope as to find out where could we really get every ounce of juice out of that synergy. And we knew that that wasn't necessarily always going to take place, but we wanted to understand it. And because it really impacted that rate of return, and it also impacted what we were able to pay the smaller business as well. So they ended up doing quite well. They didn't really want to sell initially, but they also recognized that most of the power was coming from the other side, and I had great relationships with them, and we had to kind of work through that. Said, hey, this was the timing. The timing was now. They would have liked to have maybe gone another year or two before they sold, but it was very relational, even in that sense. The fact that I had the relationship with these folks for a long time, that they knew our industry, that we worked through taking care of the people in the process, both in terms of either a retention or a severance agreement that was going to take care of folks, was also very important. But really understanding the business. I mean, because of where the role I played, I really understood their business. I mean, I was over there. This was in a different city, and I was at their location, oftentimes a couple days a week, for a number of years. And so, relationships, synergies, and taking care of people was really the things that I would take away from the acquisition.
Yeah, I mean, both based on what you just shared about the numbers, it sounds to me like they got a really good price out of it.
They
When
did.
you added everything together, they got a pretty good deal out of it. And that's significant to mention and underline because sometimes, right, when there are synergies between companies, when the seller is willing to work with the buyer on specific things like the consulting agreement, all these other things, you can really change that purchase price
Yeah.
for someone who's interested in selling. There are
Mhm.
things you can do to really increase what you get, the multiple you get. And this story reminds us there are tons of things that are going to impact that bottom line for the seller.
And
And
that multiple in this case probably was sweetened because of the impact on the core company. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, if you just looked at the standalone numbers, you probably wouldn't have been as rich on that acquisition as we were. But but that was what the whole goal was from the beginning, was what could the synergy be on the core company. It was really an enabling technology, if you will, that really enabled a company that was in a cash cow position in a declining industry to disrupt the path. Now, it didn't change it forever, but it sure sweetened the pot for the core company for a significant number of years, and it gave them a competitive edge with leading customers. And that market leadership component also was not inconsequential. The fact that we could take that new innovative knowledge that and there was a lot of pride. I mean, the company had a lot of pride being able to do this. And so when you go to trade shows, we would actually go and show these presentations at trade shows right there on the floor. And it was a lot of fun. It was quite the adventure. It really was.
yeah, that it sounds like it. I mean, from my perspective as a business person, I do enjoy business. I think it's a lot of fun, and just finding these solutions and creating synergies is a big concept in our community. Collaborative partnerships. In this case, right, you had two different companies that ultimately the outside organization was bought by the parent company. But you have that possible in a lot of industries for a lot of companies. You can actually form collaborations with outside entities where both companies benefit from each other. I'm a big fan of it. I think it's the easiest way to grow, really, in the world of business. You learn from each other. They had access to your expertise of being in and your team because you guys were working together, collaborating. It would have taken them months and years to probably years to uncover those insights that you guys had into it. So again, it's like such a powerful concept, so easy, right? Find people whose skill sets are complementing you and
Mhm.
build collaborations around it. It's such an easy, logical thing, and yet we don't do it most often.
Right.
We try to solve everything on our own. I think that's why this is the last thing I'll say on this topic. Competence sometimes can be a dangerous thing. We feel like, oh, we can solve this. And yes, you can solve it at an okay level. But if you collaborate, you get exponential or geometrical growth. And I think the story shows us that specific.
I think so as well. One point I'd like to make, though, is that collaboration at the early stages wasn't always comfortable because you did have a little bit of competing interest and unknown results that were coming. But those of us who had the vision, because it was definitely a team effort, and we had the vision, and those rallied around that. And it took a while before that we hit the tipping point where folks really saw the value in mass within the organization. And so I would just encourage anybody who is working on a collaborative project that don't always think it's going to be easy at the front end, but it might really be worth it as you press through those early stages and you get that vision cast and as you get more and more people coming on board and they can see the possibilities, it makes all the difference.
That's really helpful that you mentioned it. I'm so thankful because that is why most people push collaborations away. They might have had those experiences where they were struggling and they pushed away. So thank you for mentioning it. Now, if you were to think of collaborations right now from your perspective, what are the things you would look at? What are the traits maybe you'd be interested in to develop collaborations, to build collaborations?
First of all, I think the collaborations on a team, if it's a relatively complicated process, the desire to learn, having patience at the front end and seeking to understand the market, seeking to understand what's working well, seeking to understand what's not working well, and then asking the people who are actually doing it day after day after day and listening. Um, it's sometimes easy to sit back and think we know. We do this or we think we know that. We have a few pieces of data, but it's really through um, the desire to learn and the willingness to test and to prove it out. And so if people don't have the patience or the desire to learn or to be able to hear from other people, we had a wide variety of people in our collaborative team. Some weren't necessarily considered to be top performers, okay? Um, but they had unique gifts to bring to the party. And I think that there's value in having a team atmosphere where everyone has a say at the table. Now, at some point, you have to close the discussion down, but that openness to learn, that curiosity, um, is absolutely key for a collaborative effort, I think.
Yeah, your comment made me think of the model exploration versus exploitation. There are
Mhm.
times where you should explore an idea, and in those
Mhm.
times, having more people at the table is very useful. Realizing people have different unique abilities is useful. But then there comes a point where you just need to start building. In this project, where do you think that tipping point was? Like you explored the idea enough. When did you pull the trigger on it? What were the
Okay.
things that made you? And I know you weren't the only person. There were
Right.
other.
It was a team effort, but um, the tipping point to what your question is there, we actually had to build some things and show people because of the nature of what we were trying to solve and some of the I'd say a little bit of opposition or the hesitancy or skepticism of some of the parties. We actually had to take some risk and physically build some environments. We built, for example, I had enough say I could actually authorize us to spend a significant amount of money to build a laboratory in the basement of our building. And we did it. We took it over to Batesville to where our home office was, so we could show all the senior executives who we knew we couldn't get to another place. We could get a couple of them, but we needed people to see and understand what we had learned and what people were responding to. So we actually had to show them. Some people have to see it. They can't hear it. The numbers don't display it when you just look at a spreadsheet. Sometimes people have to visibly see it. And our team took the effort to build and show and demonstrate. And I know they say seeing is believing. It really did was important for us because of the nature of the marketing systems that we were building. And it made all the difference. We actually turned a lot of people around with that one exercise of building something they could see.
Well, that's again, that's such a good principle because it applies to any industry, right?
Mhm.
Are you trying to solve a problem? Can you create something that would turn people around by seeing it? A lot of times we give up on an idea because people don't respond. Yet, if you create a model, and it doesn't have to be, in your case, you had the money
Yeah,
and you had the ability to build something much on a bigger scale. But a lot of times we can build something smaller on a small scale. I think
that's
it's
right.
a super valuable idea. So going from there, if someone who is maybe in a part of a bigger company, part of a corporate, the corporate world, has the desire, they have seen a
Mhm.
problem and they can think of a way to solve it. What kind of advice would you give those people to maybe create something within the company or outside a company to then right lead to those synergies with the parent company? This is indirectly one of the things you're talking about.
Yeah.
What did you learn from your experience that maybe might be relevant to other people in other industries?
Well, one thing is to keep casting the vision. Once you find what you think is something that you can justify it and support, is keep casting the vision. It takes a long time before people really can turn in some cases. And about the time you get tired of saying it, they're just starting to get it. And I'd say stay resolute in your beliefs and your vision, and then find people who are like-minded and who are looking for trying to solve the same kind of issues. Those are all important things. And also, we also incorporated another piece was we incorporated the consumer or the customer, and sometimes bringing the customer in who had the problem and they said they solved that this was a good solution to the problem they were trying to face. That also is powerful. And having people who touch this problem every day come give feedback as well. And sometimes in the large corporation, the corporation is separated from sometimes the end users. And so anything they can do to bridge that gap, to bring those testimonials back in, and it's pretty hard to not listen to the customer when they are the ones who are experiencing the issue and they see a potential solution.
Yeah, that's great. When we started, I shared with you that I wanted to do this because I do believe there are parallel principles that anyone can take. But as we had the conversation, it became even more clear that is true. Cast a vision. That is true for almost any
Mhm.
business acquirer. If you buy a business, you want to grow it into something better, you're going to have to cast that vision. And I know as someone who bought a business, it was at times I was just tired of it. Like, guys, we have this vision to build this great business. Why aren't we doing it? And so you do get tired of it. But if you continue, if you are persistent, consistent,
Yeah.
it will pay off. And that was a hard lesson I had to learn myself.
Well, and that's true. And it's true for the team development as well, whether they're the employees of a small business or whether they're doing something else. I mean, that vision casting, it just that's the leader's role. It's important, and but it's also important to be able to hear feedback to adjust that vision as new information comes to light, and we need to discern what that is and weigh it and make sure that it's valuable and it's a two-way communication piece that gets back to that collaboration. That collaboration communication is all important in that collaborative team, you know.
Yeah,
So.
thank you, Randy. This was really helpful. I'm sure the listeners are going to benefit a lot from hearing your story. Anything else you would add on at the end? From your experience, you've done so many different things. Is there anything to encourage a person who's thinking about buying a business or growing their business to continue? Sometimes we have hard days. What would be one last thing you'd add?
I would say, we do have hard days in businesses of all sizes, but continue to see the bright spot, continue to see the adventure, continue to see the value that we're bringing and believe in what we're doing and enjoy the journey. I think that's really critical. I think if we enjoy the journey, I think the people who work with us and for us and who we serve will see that, and they'll take us great, great ways down towards success. And so that would be my counsel.
That's great. Thank you, Randy.
Thanks, Delia. Take care.